Salut les chouchous! Today I want to tell you how I began my self-development journey and about the biggest life lesson I have ever learned. Let's rewind about 20 years. Back then I was very young and impressionable, and I started a relationship with a guy who turned out to be abusive. It lasted about 2 years, but 7 years after the breakup, I was still carrying a lot of fear and anger inside. I thought that the only way to heal and move on was by forgiving him. And I tried over the years really hard, but I couldn't. One day I was walking down the street in Paris and I was once again reflecting on that story, trying to let go and forgive when my anger started flaring up again. And suddenly that little voice popped in my head and said, maybe you don't want to forgive him. And my first reaction was, what? Why? First, I'm a good person, so of course I want to forgive him. But secondly, and most important, I want to move on, so I need to forgive him. But then the little voice came back and said, maybe you should forgive yourself. And now my reaction was, what the fuck?
What the fuck?
Forgive myself for what exactly? I am a victim here. And then that very annoying little voice continued and said, yes, sure, he mistreated you, but you let him. The day I had that epiphany, it felt like the sky was crashing down on my head. All those years, whenever I was telling that story to people, I was always placing myself as the poor victim, and I got a lot of sympathy for it. It had never occurred to me that I was partly responsible for what had happened to me. Well, I wasn't responsible for him abusing me in the first place, of course, but I chose to stay when things got ugly. I chose to put up with it when I could have gone. I chose to accept when I could have said no and stuck up for myself. That day was really hard for me because for the first time in my life, I was finally being honest with myself. I had been raised to be a little Miss Perfect, and all my life I had fancied myself to be righteous and good. Eventually, I had to look at my darker sides and accept them. And by doing that, I could finally take responsibility for my actions. And that became the base of my work on myself. Now, each time something bad happens to me, like being sick or being treated poorly by somebody else, etc., I always ask myself, am I responsible for this thing happening? Obviously, if I try to pet a snake and it bites me, the answer is yes. On the other hand, if my employer goes bankrupt and I lose my job, the answer is no. If the answer is yes, I need to take responsibility and learn a lesson for next time. But whether the answer is yes or no, the way I react and handle that thing is always my choice. Don't get me wrong, some choices are extremely hard to make. For example, another woman married with children and no personal income in an abusive relationship will have a harder time making a decision than me. I had it easy compared to her. But despite difficulties, we always have to take responsibility. That day was also challenging for me because feeling that everything was in my own hands was extremely overwhelming. Suddenly, I couldn't blame the outside world for my misfortunes. I couldn't be a victim anymore. Back then, being a victim was actually a mindset for me, and it felt very comfortable, like a warm blanket I was wrapping myself in. People cared, offered sympathy. I was the poor, brave hero in my own story. It took me some courage and some time to throw that blanket away. But at the same time, taking responsibility made me feel empowered. Finally, I discovered that I had the strength to make good choices and help myself grow. Last thing about that story, when I finally understood that I needed to forgive myself, well, forgiving him became a non-issue. I was not angry at him anymore because all along I had been angry at myself. It took me a while to forgive myself, and one day I realized that I could only do so when I would be certain that I would never accept to be mistreated again. Well, there you go. Although I'm trying to apply this huge life lesson on a daily basis, I'm still very much work in progress. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please share it and subscribe. And I wish you a lot of courage and serenity on your own journey.